3 days before Thanksgiving, 22-year-old Jasmine Pace seemed just like any other college student. She was active on social media, laughing with friends, and looking forward to the holiday weekend. On November 26th, she shared a smiling selfie with a short caption. "Enjoying Thanksgiving with my baby." To anyone scrolling past, it looked like a moment of joy. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. But what no one realized at the time was that this single post would become the final glimpse of Jasmine's life. Just hours later, Jasmine would disappear. Her phone would go silent. Her friends' calls would ring unanswered. And the same cheerful photo that once looked ordinary would soon take on a chilling meaning, the last trace of a young woman whose story was about to grip an entire community. What happened in the hours after that post? Who was with her? And how did investigators uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath what first appeared to be a normal holiday weekend? This is the story of Jasmine Pace, a case that began with a simple selfie and ended with a revelation that shocked Tennessee to its core. Before the headlines and before the search, Jasmine Pace was simply Jasmine, a young woman building her life in Chattanooga. At just 22 years old, she was in college studying, dreaming, and like many people her age, balancing school with friendships, family, and plans for the future. Friends described her as bright, kind, and full of energy. She loved going out with those close to her, sharing her world on social media, and talking about what was ahead. To her family, she wasn't just a student, she was a daughter with a warm smile and a heart that made people feel at ease. Jasmine's personality showed through in the little things, the way she posted small updates, her playful photos, and her closeness with her mother. She was connected, present, and always in touch. That was why her sudden silence just days after Thanksgiving felt so alarming. For those who knew her best, Jasmine not answering calls or texts wasn't normal, it was a red flag. In the days before she vanished, there were no clear warnings, no obvious signs that something was about to go wrong. Jasmine appeared to be living the life of an ordinary young woman. And maybe that's what makes her story so haunting. She could have been anyone's daughter, sister, or friend. Her disappearance wasn't just another case in the news. It was the unraveling of a life full of potential, cut short before it could truly begin. The Saturday after Thanksgiving began like any other day for Jasmine. She was still active online, still sharing little glimpses of her life. Nothing seemed out of place. To friends and family, it looked like a regular weekend for a college student enjoying her break. But behind the scenes, Jasmine's movements started to shift in ways no one around her could see. That evening, she left her apartment in Chattanooga. Where she was going and who she was meeting wasn't clear to those closest to her. What's known now is that she spent part of that night with a man named Jason Chinsali, someone she had been seeing. At first, there was nothing unusual about it. People meet up all the time, especially around the holidays. But it was during these hours that Jasmine's digital footprint began to tell a story of its own. Her phone records showed unusual activity. Her location started to bounce across areas she normally didn't visit. And as the hours passed, her online presence, normally steady and consistent, began to fade. To her family, none of this was visible yet. They believed Jasmine was simply out, living her life, maybe busy with friends. But this night would be the turning point. Within 24 hours, Jasmine's silence would grow impossible to ignore, and the ordinary weekend would transform into the start of a nightmare. For Jasmine's family, the first sign that something was wrong came quickly. She wasn't answering calls. She wasn't responding to texts. At first, it could have been nothing. Maybe she was busy, maybe her phone battery had died. But the hours kept passing, and the silence felt unusual. Then came the messages. Her mother received texts that claimed Jasmine was going out and would see her later. On the surface, they seemed like simple updates. But the moment her mother read them, she felt a chill. The tone didn't sound like Jasmine. The words were stiff, almost like someone else had written them. This wasn't the daughter she knew, the daughter who usually called, who checked in, who sounded warm and familiar in every message. These texts felt cold, detached, and wrong. And that instinct, a mother's instinct, would soon prove to be right. As Sunday turned into Monday, Jasmine's online presence went completely dark. No new posts. No replies. No trace of her routine. For a young woman who was always connected, it was deeply out of character. Her family's worry grew into fear. Something had happened. Something she wasn't able to explain. And though they couldn't yet see the full picture, the silence was the beginning of a truth more devastating than they could imagine. By the start of the week, Jasmine's silence was impossible to ignore. Her mother, who spoke with her almost every day, knew this wasn't a simple case of being busy. Something was wrong. The last real contact Jasmine's family had with her was a late-night call on November 22nd. Her mother answered, and Jasmine's voice sounded normal. Nothing alarming, no hint of what was about to unfold. That call would later stand out as the very last time anyone heard from Jasmine directly. After that, there was nothing. The strange Thanksgiving post showed up days later, but her mother knew it wasn't Jasmine's voice behind it. She began reaching out to Jasmine's friends, asking if anyone had heard from her. The answers were all the same. No one had seen her, no one had spoken to her, and no one knew where she was. That alone was unusual. Jasmine didn't just disappear from the people she cared about. Her mother then did what any parent fearing the worst would do: she called the police. At first, officers listened carefully but reminded her that adults sometimes step away from contact on their own. Maybe Jasmine needed space. Maybe she'd turn up soon. But her mother's instincts didn't waver. This wasn't voluntary. She pressed for answers, telling investigators about the odd messages, about the sudden silence on her phone and social media. To her, these were more than small details. They were warning signs. As officers took the first report, Jasmine's case shifted from a mother's worry to an official investigation. What began as a quiet alarm within the family was about to grow much larger, because the moment police began tracing Jasmine's digital trail, the truth started coming into focus. Once the missing person report was filed, investigators moved quickly. Their first step was to check Jasmine's phone activity. In today's world, digital footprints often tell the story when someone goes silent. And in Jasmine's case, the data painted a troubling picture. Her phone had last pinged in areas she normally didn't visit. Locations shifted late at night, moving across parts of Chattanooga with no clear explanation. Then, suddenly, the signals stopped. Her device, which was usually active, had gone dark. Detectives also checked her bank cards, her social media accounts, and her recent messages. The results were the same everywhere. No movement, no updates, no sign that Jasmine was living her normal routine. It was as if she had vanished. Meanwhile, her family and friends began searching on their own. Flyers were made, calls were placed, and words spread quickly across the community. Jasmine wasn't a stranger. She was a well-known young woman, and people cared about what happened to her. Police treated every hour as critical. Disappearances can grow colder with time, but this one was different. Between the odd text messages, the sudden silence, and the phone's unusual activity, investigators knew early on that they weren't dealing with someone who simply chose to step away. For investigators, Jasmine's phone became the key to understanding her last movements. Every message, every location ping, every call log could hold the answer. And what they found only deepened their concerns. Then came the location data. On the night Jasmine disappeared, her phone moved through areas she rarely visited. One ping placed her near a neighborhood outside her normal routine. Another showed movement late at night, almost as if the device was being carried by someone else. And then, nothing. The signal stopped altogether. Investigators also dug into her social media. No new posts. No replies to friends. A young woman who was always connected had suddenly gone silent everywhere. For police, this wasn't just unusual, it was alarming. The more they pieced together, the clearer it became: Jasmine hadn't walked away from her life. Something had happened. And whoever was with her that night was becoming the center of attention. As police built their timeline, they turned to the people who knew Jasmine best. Friends were interviewed, messages were reviewed, and slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge. Jasmine's friends confirmed what her mother already feared. Disappearing like this wasn't in her nature. She always checked in, always responded, and never ignored those closest to her. To them, the silence was just as alarming as the strange texts. When investigators asked who Jasmine had been spending time with recently, a name came up more than once: Jason Chinsali. He wasn't a long-term partner, but he had been seen with Jasmine in the days leading up to her disappearance. Some friends mentioned they were dating casually. Others described him as distant and hard to read. For detectives, this was the first real lead. If Jason had been with Jasmine on the night she vanished, he might hold answers. They now had someone specific to look at, someone who could explain where Jasmine went and why her phone had stopped moving. Friends provided screenshots, conversations, and details that helped narrow down the timeline. Piece by piece, it became clear that Jasmine's final hours weren't spent alone. And the man at the center of those hours was about to step directly into the investigation. With Jason Chinsali's name now on the table, investigators shifted their attention toward him. He wasn't a stranger to Jasmine's circle, but he wasn't deeply trusted either. Friends described him as quiet, reserved, and sometimes difficult to understand. To police, that made him worth a closer look. The first step was simple: confirm whether Jason had been with Jasmine on the night she vanished. Phone records, messages, and digital traces began to line up. It appeared that Jasmine had indeed met with him shortly before her phone went silent. Detectives also noted something important: Jason hadn't reached out to Jasmine's family or friends after she disappeared. While others were calling, posting, and sharing their concern, Jason stayed quiet. He hadn't volunteered information. He hadn't stepped forward to help. This silence raised red flags. In cases like these, people closest to the missing person are often the first to be questioned, not just because of suspicion, but because they're expected to care. Jason's distance, paired with the evidence that he was with Jasmine that night, made him more than just a casual name in the investigation. He was now a person of interest. And as police began looking deeper into his movements, their suspicions would only grow stronger. It's just after 2 a.m. on Thanksgiving weekend. The building is quiet, until it isn't. From Jason's unit, the neighbor below hears a sudden burst of chaos, voices raised, the sound of a struggle, then a heavy, bone-shaking thud. The noise is so sharp, so out of place, that the neighbor remembers the exact time: 2:11 a.m. Moments later, silence. No footsteps leaving. No doors opening. Just silence that feels heavier than the noise itself. 7 minutes pass. At 2:18 a.m., Jasmine's phone does something unusual. It sends her mother a location pin. No message attached, no words of explanation. Just raw coordinates, dropped into the middle of the night. Her mom sees it, confused, not knowing this will be the last digital sign of her daughter alive. Why would Jasmine send it? Was it a cry for help? Was Jason trying to throw her mother off? No one can say for sure. But investigators will later call this pin one of the most haunting clues of the entire case. After the thud, after the pin, the neighbor hears something else. At 2:30 a.m., a television suddenly blares from Jason's unit. Minutes later, the garbage disposal grinds loudly, followed by the steady churn of a washing machine. It doesn't sound like someone watching TV to relax. It sounds like someone creating noise, to hide another kind of noise. Investigators would later argue these weren't just household sounds. They were cover-up sounds, the mechanical soundtrack of a crime scene being cleaned. By sunrise, Jason emerges from the apartment. A surveillance camera catches him carrying a large black duffel bag, straining under its weight. He loads it into a car. To anyone watching in real time, it's just a man carrying luggage. Nothing suspicious. But days later, when investigators find that same kind of bag in a creek, stuffed inside a suitcase with Jasmine's remains, the footage takes on a new, chilling meaning. The bag is no longer ordinary. It's evidence. Nighttime doesn't give up its secrets easily. But sometimes, the smallest detail is enough. In one clip, Jason is seen behind the wheel of Jasmine's car. The video is dark, blurry, but unmistakable. A white hood pulled tight over his head glows against the shadows. In the grainy footage, that one flash of brightness confirms who's driving. Investigators argue it proves Jason was moving Jasmine's car himself, long after she was gone. Search teams follow Jason's trail to Suck Creek, a quiet stretch of water on the edge of Chattanooga. Beneath the surface, they find a suitcase, wrapped in multiple trash bags. Shackled heavy, forced to sink. Inside, Jasmine. The discovery links everything together: the bag on camera, the fingerprint on a trash bag, the eerie 218 pin. Piece by piece, the hidden story of that night is dragged from the darkness into daylight. Detectives knew Jasmine's phone was the lifeline to her final hours. Calls, texts, GPS, all locked inside. But when they searched, something didn't add up. The phone itself was gone, and so was the SIM card. That SIM wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was Jasmine's digital fingerprint, the trail of where she was, who she spoke to, and when. And someone had carefully removed it. Weeks later, during a search of Jason's family home, investigators found it hidden. Out of sight, but not destroyed. For prosecutors, that single detail spoke volumes. Jason didn't panic in the moment. He took time to erase Jasmine from the grid. He wanted her voice gone, her presence gone, her proof gone. But instead of erasing her, the missing SIM became a symbol of control. And in the courtroom, it would stand as chilling evidence of intent. For Jasmine's mother, the silence was unbearable. She hadn't heard her daughter's voice in days, and the 2:18 a.m. location ping was her only lead. When police hesitated, she drove to Jason's apartment herself. Her daughter's car was right there, parked outside. Something wasn't right. Unable to wait another minute, she forced her way inside. The sight that met her wasn't confusion. It was confirmation. Jasmine's wallet. Her ID. Her bank cards. Things she would never, ever leave behind. The air was heavy, the apartment disordered, as if something violent had just passed through. Her mother knew instantly. Jasmine hadn't walked away. She hadn't chosen silence. Something had been done to her. That desperate act, a mother breaking into her daughter's last known location, became the spark that pushed investigators harder. What they had suspected quietly was now undeniable. December 3rd, nearly 2 weeks after Jasmine vanished. Police tracked Jason to his parents' home in Nolensville. This wasn't a surprise takedown. By then, suspicion had surrounded him completely. Bodcam footage shows officers approaching. Jason is calm, eerily calm. He doesn't run, doesn't argue. He simply allows the cuffs to click shut, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. But the quiet on his face masks something darker. Because what he carries with him that day will become one of the most disturbing discoveries in the entire case. Slung across Jason's shoulder as police led him away was a heavy backpack. Inside, detectives found no clothes, no personal items, no attempt at escape. Instead, they found papers. Page after page of notes. Each one was filled with possible questions detectives might ask, and the answers Jason had rehearsed. What did you do that night? Where was Jasmine last seen? Why is her car here? His responses were neat, calculated, almost robotic. Like a script for an interview he knew was coming. To investigators, it was chilling. To prosecutors, it was invaluable. The backpack proved something critical. Jason wasn't caught off guard. He was preparing for the inevitable, planning his lies in advance. It wasn't panic. It was calculation. When Jason finally stood trial, the courtroom was packed. Every bench was filled with journalists, neighbors, and most importantly, Jasmine's grieving family. The prosecution's case unfolded step by step. The neighbor who reported the late-night fight, the thud against the wall. The 2:18 a.m. pin that placed Jasmine's phone at Jason's apartment. The missed call to her mother that came at the exact same time the struggle was heard. Surveillance of Jason carrying a large duffel bag down his stairs. The white hooded sweatshirt caught on camera behind the wheel of her car. The discovery of Jasmine's belongings, thrown into a creek. Layered together, these pieces told a story the defense couldn't untangle. And then came the backpack. Prosecutors read Jason's rehearsed answers aloud. Each one colder than the last. Each one exposing the careful, calculated effort to hide the truth. For the jury, it wasn't just circumstantial evidence. It was a roadmap of guilt written in his own hand. The jury deliberated for hours, weighing every piece of evidence. When they returned, the courtroom went silent. The verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of abuse of a corpse. Jason Chin was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Jasmine's family, the verdict was justice, but it wasn't closure. Justice doesn't bring a daughter back. It doesn't erase the late-night silence, the unanswered calls, the pain of every holiday without her. As her mother held Jasmine's photo in court, the same smiling face from that final Thanksgiving post, one truth remained: her story was bigger than Jason. It became a reminder of instincts that proved right, of how quickly danger can appear behind a familiar face, and of how a community can carry the memory of one young woman long after the trial ends. Jasmine's story leaves behind questions that will never truly be answered. But one thing is certain: her memory will never fade. If you want to see more real cases, mysteries, and stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And before you go, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from tonight?